Hunger gnawed at Hannah Wilson's hollow stomach as she trudged down the dusty main street of Copper Creek, her threadbare dress hanging loosely from her once healthy frame. The Montana Territory of 1878 had proven far crueler than the hopeful advertisements had promised back east. 3 days without food had left her dizzy, desperate, and alone in a town where no one seemed to care if another penniless woman perished. The relentless afternoon sun beat down as Hannah stumbled, catching herself against the rough wooden post of the general store's porch. The smell of fresh bread from the nearby bakery was torture, a reminder of all she lacked. Her parents' graves were 2 months fresh, the farm they'd struggled to establish now claimed by creditors, leaving Hannah with nothing but the clothes on her back and a locket containing her mother's portrait. "You all right there, miss?" The deep voice startled her. Hannah turned to see a tall man regarding her with piercing blue eyes from beneath the brim of a dusty black hat. His weathered face suggested he was in his early 30s, and despite the trail dirt on his clothes, he carried himself with quiet confidence. "I'm fine, thank you," Hannah lied, straightening her posture despite the room spinning around her. The stranger's gaze was too perceptive. "When's the last time you ate something?" The direct question stripped away her pretense. 3 days ago, she admitted, her voice barely audible. He nodded once, as if confirming a suspicion. "Name's Victor Reeves. I've got a place outside of town and food." Hannah felt her defenses rise despite her desperate situation. "I'm not that kind of woman, sir." A flicker of something respect perhaps crossed his features. "Never suggested you were. I'm offering a meal, not impropriety." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Truth is, I've got a proposition of a different sort." Hannah swayed slightly, fighting to stay conscious. "What kind of proposition?" "Marriage," he stated simply, as if discussing the weather. "I need a wife for my homestead. You need food and shelter. Seems we might solve each other's problems." Under normal circumstances, Hannah would have laughed at such an outrageous suggestion from a stranger, but starvation had a way of changing one's perspective on what qualified as outrageous. "Why me?" she managed to ask. Victor Reeves studied her for a moment. "You're standing instead of begging. That tells me something about your character." He gestured toward the nearby cafe. "Let's get some food in you, then you can decide." The smell of stew nearly overwhelmed Hannah as they entered the small establishment. Victor led her to a corner table and ordered 2 meals without consulting the menu. "Eat slowly," he advised when the steaming bowls arrived. "Your stomach won't handle much at first." Hannah forced herself not to gulp the food, taking small, careful bites of the rich beef stew. As her mind cleared with each spoonful, she studied the man across from her. His hands were calloused, his face tanned from outdoor work. A small scar crossed his left eyebrow, and though he wasn't conventionally handsome, there was something compelling about his steady gaze. "Why do you need a wife?" she asked finally. Victor took a sip of coffee before answering. "I've got 300 acres, 40 head of cattle, and a decent house I built myself. What I don't have is someone to help make it a home." He set his cup down. "The territory's no place for a man alone." "And I'm tired of being alone." "You could have any woman in town," Hannah countered. "Why marry a stranger you found half-starved in the street?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Town women want comforts I can't provide. They want fancy dresses and social gatherings. I'm offering hard work and simple living." He leaned forward slightly. "But I promise you this, you'll eat beside me forever. You'll never go hungry again." The simple promise brought unexpected tears to Hannah's eyes. In a world that had taken everything from her, the guarantee of daily bread seemed almost too precious to believe. "I don't love you," she said plainly. "I'm not asking for love, just partnership, respect." He held her gaze. "The rest might come with time, or it might not. Either way, we'd face life together instead of alone." Hannah's 22 years had taught her that life offered few second chances. She'd come west with her parents dreaming of a new beginning, only to watch them succumb to illness within months of each other. The harsh realities of frontier life had stripped away any romantic notions she once held. "How do I know you're not worse than starvation?" she asked bluntly. Victor nodded, as if he'd expected the question. "Fair concern. Ask anyone in town about Victor Reeves. I've been here 4 years. Never cause trouble, pay my debts, work my land." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and pushed it across the table. My deed, the land is mine, free and clear. Hannah examined the official-looking document, recognizing it as legitimate. What would be expected of me? Cooking. Keeping house, helping with garden work and chickens. He paused. And eventually, children, I want a family. A flush crept up Hannah's neck at the implied intimacy, but she appreciated his directness. And if it doesn't work between us? After a year, if you're unhappy, I'll bring you back to town with enough money to start over elsewhere. He shrugged. I'm not looking to trap anyone, just trying to build something that lasts. The practical arrangement he proposed made a strange kind of sense. Hannah had no prospects, no family, no future as things stood. At least with Victor Reeves, she'd have food and shelter and perhaps, in time, something more. I accept, she said quietly, the words changing the course of her life in an instant. Victor's expression remained unchanged, but something in his eyes softened. Finish your meal. We'll see the preacher before heading home. 2 hours later, Hannah found herself standing before the town's small church, exchanging vows with a man she'd met only hours before. The simple ceremony was attended by just 2 witnesses, the shopkeeper and his wife, who Victor seemed to know well. Do you have any belongings to collect? Victor asked as they stepped back into the afternoon sunlight, a plain gold band now encircling her finger. Hannah shook her head. Just what I'm wearing, he frowned slightly. We'll stop at the mercantile, you'll need some things. To Hannah's surprise, Victor was generous at the store, purchasing fabric for dresses, undergarments, a warm coat, sturdy boots, and personal items without comment or complaint about the cost. He added food supplies and other necessities to their order with efficient precision. Mrs. Reeves will need a proper hat, he told the shopkeeper, selecting a simple but well-made bonnet that Hannah would never have been able to afford on her own. The use of her new name startled her. Mrs. Reeves. She was someone's wife now, this stranger's partner in life. As Victor loaded their purchases into a wagon, Hannah noticed the quality of his equipment solid, well-maintained, neither ostentatious nor shabby. Like the man himself, everything was practical and purposeful. It's about an hour's ride, he said, helping her onto the wagon seat. You can rest if you need to. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they traveled away from town, following a well-worn trail that eventually turned onto a smaller path marked by a wooden sign reading, Reeves Ranch. Hannah tried to absorb everything as they approached the neat fences, the small herd of cattle visible in a distant pasture, the tidy outbuildings, and finally, the house itself. It was larger than she expected, a 2-story structure built of solid logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting someone had been tending the fire. It's beautiful, Hannah said honestly. Miguel must have come by to check on things, Victor explained, noting her questioning glance at the smoke. He helps out sometimes when I'm in town. The wagon had barely stopped when the front door opened, revealing a stocky Mexican man in his 50s. Senor Reeves, I was beginning to worry. His gaze fell on Hannah and his eyes widened. And who is this? Miguel Santana, meet my wife, Hannah Reeves, Victor said, the words sounding strange but not unpleasant to Hannah's ears. Miguel's surprise gave way to a broad smile. Dios mío, a wife, this is wonderful news. He hurried forward to help Hannah down from the wagon. Welcome to your home, Senora Reeves. I have stew keeping warm inside. The genuine warmth of his welcome made Hannah's eyes sting with unexpected tears. It had been so long since anyone had been truly glad to see her. Victor's hand settled briefly on the small of her back as they climbed the porch steps. Miguel and his family have the next ranch over. They've been good neighbors. The interior of the house surprised Hannah as much as the exterior had. While certainly not luxurious, it was clean and well-ordered, with solid, handcrafted furniture and a spaciousness she hadn't anticipated. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A wooden staircase led to what she assumed were bedrooms above. I built it thinking of family, Victor explained, watching her take in her surroundings. Wanted room to grow. Miguel busied himself serving the stew he'd prepared, chatting about local happenings and the condition of Victor's cattle. Hannah noticed the easy rapport between the two men, how Victor listened attentively to Miguel's updates about a new calf and weather predictions. After they'd eaten and Miguel had departed with promises to bring his wife to meet Hannah soon, an awkward silence fell between the newlyweds. "I'll show you upstairs," Victor finally said, gathering their packages from the mercantile. The upper floor contained 3 bedrooms: the master bedroom with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a smaller room that Victor explained was his office, and a third room that was empty save for a rocking chair by the window. "For children someday," he said simply, before continuing to the master bedroom. He set her packages on a chest at the foot of the bed. "This is our room. There's a washroom off the kitchen downstairs if you'd like to clean up." Hannah stood in the doorway, the reality of her situation suddenly overwhelming. She was married to this man, this stranger, and was now expected to share his bed. Victor seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll sleep in my office tonight," he said quietly. "Give you time to settle in." He moved past her toward the door. "I don't expect anything you're not ready to give, Hannah. This may not be a love match, but I intend to be a good husband to you." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her chest. "Thank you," he nodded once. "I rise early to tend the stock." "I'll try not to wake you." He paused at the door. "Sleep well, wife." Alone in the bedroom, Hannah unpacked her new belongings, marveling at the strange turn her life had taken. That morning, she'd been starving and hopeless. Now she was fed, sheltered, and married to a man who, while a stranger, seemed decent and honorable. She washed in the downstairs washroom, grateful for the clean water and soap, before changing into a new nightgown and returning to the bedroom. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the sheets clean and smelling faintly of sunshine, as if they'd been dried outdoors. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as Hannah's mind raced with thoughts of her new husband. Victor Reeves was not what she would have chosen for herself in different circumstances. He was older, serious, reserved. Yet there was kindness in his actions, feeding her before proposing, purchasing necessities without complaint, giving her space on their wedding night. "You'll eat beside me forever," he'd promised. Such a simple thing to guarantee, yet it had moved her more than flowery declarations of affection might have. Hannah finally drifted off, wondering what tomorrow would bring as Mrs. Reeves. The smell of coffee and bacon woke her the next morning. Sunlight streamed through the window, indicating it was later than she usually rose. Hannah dressed quickly in one of her new outfits, a simple blue calico dress, and made her way downstairs. Victor stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. He'd already been out. His boots by the door were damp with morning dew, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal forearms tanned by outdoor work. "Good morning," Hannah said softly. He turned, a flash of something like pleasure crossing his features before his expression returned to its usual calm. "Sleep well. Better than I have in months," she admitted. Victor nodded, serving up plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Wasn't sure what you like for breakfast." "Miguel's wife Elena sent over fresh eggs and milk yesterday. It looks wonderful." Hannah sat at the table, watching as Victor poured coffee for them both. "I'm used to cooking for others. You don't have to serve me. Today's different," he said, taking his seat across from her. First day and all, they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Victor spoke again. "I thought I'd show you around the place today, help you get your bearings. I'd like that." After breakfast, Victor took Hannah on a tour of the ranch. The property was impressive: 300 acres of mixed grassland and woods, with a creek running through the eastern section. The barn housed 4 horses, including a gentle mare that Victor said would be Hannah's to ride when she was ready. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard behind the house, and a well-tended vegetable garden stretched nearby. "Elena helps with the garden sometimes," Victor explained. "I'm not much good with growing things that aren't grass for cattle." "I know about gardens," Hannah offered. "My mother taught me." Victor's expression lightened slightly. "Good. It's yours to manage now." As they walked the property, Hannah began to understand why Victor needed a partner. The ranch was too much for one person to maintain properly. There were endless tasks: livestock to tend, fences to repair, buildings to maintain, food to preserve for winter. "You've done all this alone," she asked as they returned to the house for the midday meal. Victor shrugged. Miguel helps sometimes. Hire extra hands for roundup and branding. He glanced at her. But yes, mostly alone. Hannah felt a newfound respect for her husband's determination and work ethic. Building this ranch from nothing would have required tremendous effort. The days fell into a pattern after that. Hannah rose early to prepare breakfast before Victor headed out to his morning chores. She spent her days cleaning the house, tending the garden, caring for the chickens, and preparing meals. Victor worked from dawn until dusk, returning for dinner tired but always making time to tell Hannah about his day. They slept in separate rooms that first week. Victor kept his word about giving her time, never pressuring or making demands. Each night he bid her good night with the same phrase, "Sleep well, wife." On their 8th day of marriage, Hannah decided to make a special dinner. She discovered Victor had a sweet tooth when Alina Santana brought over a pie, and she'd watched his eyes light up at the first bite. Using ingredients from the pantry and eggs from their chickens, she baked a cake with vanilla frosting. Victor's surprise was evident when he came in from the fields that evening. "What's the occasion?" he asked, eyeing the cake at the center of the table. "1 week married," Hannah said, feeling suddenly shy. "I thought we might celebrate." Something like pleasure warmed his usually guarded expression. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." Dinner that night was more relaxed than usual. Victor asked questions about Hannah's life before Montana, her childhood in Pennsylvania, her parents, her dreams before hardship had narrowed her focus to mere survival. "I always loved books," she confessed. "My father thought it was a waste of time for a girl, but my mother encouraged it." Victor's expression grew thoughtful. "There's a trunk in my office with books, my mother's collection. You're welcome to them." The offer touched Hannah deeply. It was the first personal thing he'd shared with her. "Thank you, I'd like that." As they ate cake, Victor spoke more about himself than he had in their entire week together. He'd come west from Virginia after the war, wanting to leave behind the devastation and memories. He'd worked as a ranch hand for 3 years, saving every penny until he could purchase his own land. "Never thought I'd have this much," he admitted quietly. "A ranch, a home, a wife." Hannah found herself studying his face in the lamplight, the small scar through his eyebrow that she now knew came from falling off a horse as a boy. The crinkles at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he was amused, the way his mouth quirked slightly to the left when he was considering something. "Victor," she said, the use of his first name still feeling intimate, "would you like me to move my things into our bedroom tonight?" His eyes met hers, searching. "Are you certain?" Hannah nodded. She wasn't in love with Victor Reeves, but she respected him, appreciated his kindness and patience, and found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet strength. "Yes," she said simply. That night they shared a bed for the first time as husband and wife. Victor was gentle and considerate, his calloused hands surprisingly tender as they learned each other's bodies in the darkness. Afterward he held her close, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For choosing to stay. For making this a real marriage." Hannah felt something shift inside her, a warmth spreading through her chest that wasn't quite love, not yet, but might someday grow into it. "Thank you for finding me that day in town." Life settled into a new rhythm after that night. They worked side by side during the days, shared meals and conversation in the evenings, and learned each other's bodies in the darkness. Hannah found herself watching for Victor's return whenever he was away from the house, missing his solid presence and quiet strength. Spring turned to summer, and the days grew longer and warmer. Hannah's garden flourished under her care, producing more vegetables than they could eat. She learned to preserve the excess for winter, with Alina Santana teaching her to can tomatoes and pickle cucumbers. One hot July afternoon, Victor returned from town with an unexpected gift, a book of poetry that he'd ordered specially from back east. "The shopkeeper told me it arrived," he said, almost shyly as he handed her the package. "Thought you might enjoy something new to read." Hannah unwrapped the volume with trembling fingers. It was a collection by Emily Dickinson, beautifully bound in soft leather. "Victor, this is too extravagant," he shook his head. "You deserve nice things." That night, she read him poems by the fire, watching his face in the flickering light as he listened intently to every word. When she finished, he reached for her hand. "I never cared much for poetry before," he said quietly, "but I like the way it sounds in your voice." Hannah leaned forward and kissed him, a spontaneous gesture that surprised them both. When she pulled back, Victor's eyes had darkened. "What was that for?" he asked. "For seeing me," she replied simply. "Not just as a wife or a housekeeper, but as Hannah." August brought a heatwave that dried the creek to a trickle and withered parts of the garden, despite Hannah's diligent watering. Victor spent long days moving cattle to better grazing areas and ensuring they had enough water. He returned each evening exhausted, his skin burned from the relentless sun. On the hottest day, Hannah prepared a cool bath for him, adding mint leaves from the garden to refresh his tired muscles. Victor's surprise was evident when he came in from the barn. "What's this?" "You're working yourself to exhaustion," Hannah said firmly. "You need to rest properly." Victor's expression softened. "You worry about me." "Of course I do. You're my husband." The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning neither had expressed before. Victor crossed to her and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "And you're my wife," he said softly. "The best decision I ever made was asking you to marry me that day." The kiss they shared was different from others before it, deeper, more meaningful, filled with emotions neither had acknowledged. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Victor traced patterns on Hannah's bare shoulder. "I never told you why I really chose you that day," he said quietly. Hannah turned to face him. "Why, I'd seen you before, at church and in town a few times." He paused. "You had this dignity about you even when things were hard, never complained, never caused trouble, just kept going." His fingers brushed her cheek. "Reminded me of my mother. She was strong like that. What happened to her? Died during the war, pneumonia. Father was already gone by then." His voice grew distant. "We had a good farm in Virginia, lost everything." Hannah laid her palm against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "I'm sorry. Built all this so I'd never lose everything again," he confessed. "But it was empty until you came." The simple admission touched Hannah deeply. "It's not empty anymore." As summer faded into fall, Hannah began to suspect she was carrying a child. Her monthly courses had stopped, and certain smells that had never bothered her before now turned her stomach. She waited until she was certain before telling Victor, wanting to be sure before giving him such news. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Hannah took his hand. "I have something to tell you," she began, suddenly nervous. Victor turned to her, concern immediately crossing his features. "Is something wrong?" "No," Hannah smiled, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Something is very right. We're going to have a baby." Victor went utterly still, his eyes widening as he processed her words. Then, to Hannah's surprise, his eyes filled with tears. "A baby," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "Our baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "Hannah," he whispered against her hair. "My Hannah." It was the first time he'd called her that my Hannah, and the simple possessive made her heart swell. This man, who had once been a stranger offering food to a starving woman, had become her partner, her protector, her friend, and now the father of her child. "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. Victor pulled back to look at her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "Happier than I've ever been." He placed his hand back on her stomach. "Thank you for this gift." As Hannah's body changed with pregnancy, Victor became even more attentive. He insisted she rest more, took over some of her household chores, and built a cradle for the baby from wood he'd been saving for special projects. Elena Santana visited often, bringing herbal teas for Hannah's morning sickness and sharing wisdom about childbearing. Winter arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Victor kept the fireplaces blazing and insisted Hannah stay warm, wrapping her in blankets and bringing her hot tea throughout the day. At night, he would talk to her growing belly, telling the baby stories about the ranch and promises of fishing trips and horseback rides when they were older. "Do you think it's a boy or girl?" Hannah asked one evening as they lay by the fire, Victor's hand resting protectively over her rounded abdomen. "A girl," he answered without hesitation, "with your eyes and spirit, and if it's a boy." Victor smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Then he'll be strong like his mother, too." The baby chose a blizzard night in late February to make its arrival. Hannah's labor pains began shortly after dinner, coming in waves that gradually increased in intensity. Victor rode through the howling storm to fetch Alina, returning with both her and the town doctor, who had fortunately been visiting the Santana ranch. After 18 hours of labor, Hannah delivered a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Victor, who had refused to leave her side throughout the ordeal, wept openly when the doctor placed their daughter in his arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, gazing down at the tiny face. "What shall we call her?" Hannah, exhausted but radiantly happy, reached out to touch her daughter's cheek. "Victoria," she suggested, "after her father." Victor looked up, his eyes filled with emotion. "Victoria Rose," he agreed. "Rose was my mother's name." As spring returned to the Montana territory, bringing new life to the ranch, Hannah watched her husband and daughter together. Victor, who had once seemed so serious and reserved, transformed completely with Victoria. He sang to her, told her stories, carried her with him around the ranch to show her the animals and plants, his deep voice a constant soothing presence in their daughter's life. One evening, as Hannah nursed Victoria in the rocking chair by the window, she looked up to find Victor watching them with an expression of such tenderness it made her breath catch. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Victor crossed the room to kneel beside the chair, one hand gently stroking Victoria's dark hair. "I'm thinking how empty my life was before you, how I didn't even know what I was missing." Hannah reached out to touch his face, tracing the lines that had softened over the past year. "I was starving that day in more ways than one," she admitted. "Not just for food." "And now?" Victor asked, his eyes searching hers. "Now I'm full," Hannah said simply, "with love, with purpose, with family." She leaned forward to press her lips to his. "I love you, Victor Reeves. Not because you saved me, but because of who you are." Victor's smile was like the sunrise, slow and warming. "I've loved you since that first week," he confessed. "When you made me that cake and asked me about my life like you truly wanted to know. I did want to know, I still do." He took her free hand, kissing her palm in a gesture that had become familiar and precious. "I promised you'd eat beside me forever, but I hope you found more than just food at our table." Hannah looked down at their daughter, then back at her husband's face, a face that had become beloved to her, as familiar now as her own reflection. "I've found everything I never knew I needed." As Victoria drifted to sleep in her arms, Hannah reflected on the strange path that had led her here. Starvation and desperation had driven her to accept a stranger's proposal. But love's slow growing, steadfast love had transformed that desperate bargain into a true marriage. Outside their window, the Montana spring painted the ranch in vibrant greens and wildflower colors. Cattle grazed in distant fields, chickens clucked in their yard, and the garden Hannah had planted was sprouting with new life. The home Victor had built and Hannah had helped make warm waited around them, solid and secure against whatever storms might come. "What are you thinking now?" Victor asked, noticing her distant gaze. Hannah smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I'm thinking how sometimes the most desperate choices lead to the greatest blessings," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "From starving to abundance." "In every way that matters," Hannah agreed, thinking not just of the food that now filled their pantry and table, but of the love that filled their home and hearts, a love that had begun with a simple, life-changing promise on a desperate day. "You'll eat beside me forever," Victor had said then, offering a starving woman the sustenance she needed to survive. What neither of them had known was how that practical arrangement would nourish not just their bodies, but their souls. Forever, Hannah thought as she gazed at her husband and sleeping daughter, no longer seemed like a business arrangement, but a precious gift. 3 years passed, bringing changes to the Reeves ranch. Victor's careful management and Hannah's frugal housekeeping allowed them to purchase an adjacent property, expanding their ranch to over 500 acres. They added more cattle, hired a permanent ranch hand named Thomas, and renovated the house to add another bedroom when Hannah discovered she was expecting their second child. Victoria, now a spirited 3-year-old with her father's determination and her mother's love of stories, chattered constantly as she followed Victor around the ranch. She was fearless with the horses, gentle with the chickens, and had already declared her intention to be a cattle lady like her father. "She's got your stubborn streak," Victor teased Hannah one evening as they watched Victoria attempting to stack blocks higher than her head, refusing help despite repeated collapses. Hannah laughed, resting a hand on her growing belly. "And your persistence." The second pregnancy was easier than the first. Hannah knew what to expect now, and the ranch was more prosperous, allowing for occasional help with household chores. Elena Santana's daughter Lucia came twice a week to assist with laundry and cleaning, giving Hannah time to rest. One crisp autumn afternoon, while Victoria napped and the house was quiet, Hannah discovered a wooden chest in the barn that she'd never seen before. Victor found her there, examining the ornately carved lid. "What's this?" she asked, curious about the craftsmanship. Victor's expression softened with memory. "My grandfather made it. It was supposed to be my hope chest for when I married." He knelt beside her, running a hand over the polished wood. "Never thought I'd find someone to share it with." Inside were family treasures Victor had carried with him from Virginia: his mother's silver hairbrush, his father's pocket watch, a handmade quilt, and a family Bible with generations of names recorded inside. "Why have you kept this hidden away?" Hannah asked gently. Victor was quiet for a moment. "Wasn't sure I deserved it. The family legacy." He met her eyes. "My parents dreamed of grandchildren, a family continuing. When they died and I came west alone, I thought that dream died too." Hannah took his hand, placing it on her rounded abdomen where their second child grew. "The dream didn't die. It just took a different path." That evening, Victor added Victoria's name to the family Bible and left space below for the child yet to come. As Hannah watched him carefully inscribe their daughter's name, she realized how far they had come from that desperate day in town when a starving woman had agreed to marry a lonely rancher. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked later, as they lay together in the darkness. "Marrying me that day." Victor pulled her closer, his hand protective over her belly. "Not for a single moment." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best decision I ever made, even though I was just a half-starved stranger. You were never just anything, Hannah." His voice was firm. "I saw something in you that day, a strength, a dignity even when you had nothing." Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "I saw something in you too, kindness when you had no reason to be kind." In December, as snow blanketed the ranch in pristine white, Hannah gave birth to a son they named James Victor Reeves. He arrived quickly, with just Elena and Victor in attendance, a robust baby with a hearty cry and his mother's warm brown eyes. Victoria was fascinated by her baby brother, constantly wanting to touch his tiny fingers and toes. Victor taught her to be gentle, showing a patience that made Hannah's heart swell with love for her husband. "He's going to be tall like you," Hannah observed one evening as Victor held James against his shoulder, the baby's fair hair contrasting with his father's darker coloring. "And thoughtful like his mother," Victor replied, smiling as James gripped his finger. "We make beautiful children together." The simple statement, delivered in Victor's matter-of-fact tone, made Hannah's eyes sting with happy tears. They did make beautiful children, and a beautiful life, one built on mutual respect that had blossomed into deep love. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch flourished. Victor's careful breeding program produced stronger cattle, and his reputation for fair dealing brought buyers from as far as Denver. Hannah's vegetable garden expanded to include medicinal herbs, which she learned to use from Elena, occasionally helping neighbors with minor ailments when the doctor was unavailable. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Victor surprised Hannah by taking her to town for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant, their first proper outing alone since James was born. Elena stayed with the children, assuring Hannah they would be fine for one evening. Victor had another surprise waiting at the restaurant, a velvet box containing a gold locket to replace the worn silver one that had contained her mother's portrait. "Open it," he urged, as Hannah examined the beautiful piece. Inside was a tiny photograph of Victoria and James on one side, and on the other, a picture of Victor himself, the first proper portrait he'd ever had taken. "So you always have your family close to your heart," he explained, watching her face. Hannah's fingers trembled as she fastened it around her neck. "It's beautiful, Victor, not as beautiful as you." He reached across the table to take her hand. "5 years ago, I made you a promise that you'd eat beside me forever. You've kept that promise," Hannah said softly. "And given me so much more than food." Victor's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I want to make another promise today." His eyes, usually so controlled, shimmered with emotion. "I promise to love you more each year than the last. To be a better husband, a better father, a better man because you and our children deserve nothing less." Hannah felt tears spill onto her cheeks. "You already are all those things." Later that night, after they returned home and checked on their sleeping children, Victor and Hannah stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the ranch that had grown along with their family. "Did you ever imagine this?" Hannah asked, leaning into her husband's embrace. "That day in town when you found me," Victor was quiet for a moment. "I hoped," he finally admitted, "not just for a wife or helper but for this, a true partner, someone to build a life with." Hannah turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, the face she had come to love more than she once thought possible. The serious lines were still there, but laughter had softened them over the years, and his eyes held a peace that hadn't been present when they first met. "From starvation to abundance," she whispered, echoing words they'd spoken years before. Victor's arms tightened around her. "In every way," he agreed, bending to kiss her beneath the star-filled Montana sky. As they walked back inside, to the home they'd built together, Hannah thought about the strange and wonderful journey that had brought them here. She had agreed to marry a stranger for food, desperate and alone. That stranger had promised she would eat beside him forever, a simple vow that had somehow expanded to encompass so much more than daily bread. Forever, she realized as she looked at their sleeping children, and the man who had become the center of her world was not a burden but a blessing. And it had only just begun.